You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
From a mausoleum in the Oakland Cemetery, downtown Atlanta, this is episode 88 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I'm Dave Roberts. She's the blonde one. Writer, TV personality, and actual journalist, Jessica Szilagyi.
Are you going to at least explain to people why it's the blonde one this week? You have to explain it.
So Jessica gets a voicemail this week that she returns a call, and the person asks her, "Are you the blonde one?" To which Jessica replies, "Yes."
Yes.
And of course, it came down to the sheriff told me to call you, and the person thought that you were like the IG or something.
Yeah, he thought that I could do like internal affairs investigations because he heard that I had worked in Brooklet and in Oak Park, which is true. But he thought that it was some sort of like, I don't know, I guess similar to Post. Like I would do some sort of internal investigation and get all this data. And so when I told him that I was a writer, he's like, "Oh, you're a journalist? I thought that you had something like a real title or something." And I was like, "No, it's just me in the interwebs." And he still wanted my help, and he was like just taken aback and surprised. But it was really funny because he's like, "Oh, I thought that you were like someone legit." Nope.
And I was going to put a meme on that thread on Facebook of Fletch, but I didn't figure you would get it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Fletch was a character played by Chevy Chase, who was an investigative journalist who exposed a bunch of corruption and everything else in the police force. But no one else outside of people over the age of 40 would really get it, and then only then you'd have to be a real dork to get it, and that's me. So, I actually got some positive feedback from last week's show.
Tell us.
Someone sent me a message on Facebook, which I'm not really happy with Facebook quarantining messages from people who aren't friends, because I don't necessarily see it. Yeah, I don't see it. I didn't, and he sent me something Monday morning when the show dropped that, something I said was funny, which, wow, he must have listened to the one show I was funny. Yeah, I know. But no, it was very nice that something I said last week he almost drove off the road listening to, and we really appreciate the feedback. Positive feedback is great, negative feedback is great.
Yes, but please remember that negative feedback is limited to 3 bullet points a week.
And constructive would be nice.
Yeah, don't be a jerk. If you don't like us, then don't listen. Like, for real.
No. Keep downloading.
Well, sure.
Keep downloading, but don't listen.
Well, don't contact us if you don't like us.
So yeah,
contact Matt Lowe.
Contact Matt Lowe. Oh, I wish I had Matt's email in front of me. It's mlowe@sevendamnkids.com. Jess, how was your week?
It was busy. I spent 3 days in the same exact county, like running around to the same 5 places in Effingham, which is a county I haven't really covered that much before. But it's been interesting. Lots of new players, lots of people telling me no.
Hey, did you start with, "I'm sorry, I'm afraid I don't think you know who I am"?
No, I've never said, "I don't think you know who I am," or "Do you know who I've never said anything like that. In fact, most times I try to play off that I'm just like a normal person, like a dumb blonde trying to get information. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
All right. Side story. So, a good friend of mine ran for office, Brian Dobbs. Before he ran for office, he was pretty well known around the gun community. We were going to test fire a AK-47 because he made machine guns. And he asked me, "Hey, you want to go shoot an AK-47? I'm like, "Yeah, dude, I'm down." So we go to the gun club, and he has an arrangement with him just to go. He can walk on the range, test fire something, and leave. So he stands there, and the young lady goes, "I need your driver's license." He goes, "I'm Brian Dobbs, Dobbs Defense." And she goes, "Well, I need your driver's license." He goes, I'm Brian Dobbs Defense. And she goes, yeah, but I need your driver's license. And he taps his finger on the counter and says, type it in the computer, Brian Dobbs. And I'm standing right behind him, dying. And I tap my finger and said, yeah, type in the computer. He goes, oh, damn it. I'm sorry. Here's my license. So whenever we go somewhere, I'll tap my finger on the table and go, do you know who this is? Do you know who this is?
Terrible.
Has nothing pertaining to the show tonight.
No, and I don't do that, and I wouldn't do that. Brian, I appreciate that you did that, but I don't do that. Plus, I got enough problems. The last thing I need is people or going around saying that I was not polite in obtaining the information. You know? They already say that I'm a troublemaker, or they're ticked that I'm asking for the information. I have to be over the top nice and kind, even when they're complete jerks.
You know, that's a thing, but it shouldn't be. You're not asking for anything special. Give them the information. It's public information. I mean, it's not like you're telling people, give me the personnel records and I want to see the salaries of every individual. You're exposing corruption, and anybody who really values a transparent government would be right behind it.
Well, it's interesting because, I always tell people everywhere that I go, I never just pick a place and then go say, oh, what can I find there? I'm always called, or somebody calls me about something specific and points me in a direction of where to start. And whether that's where I end up or it leads me to something else, that's always to be determined. But what's always amazing to me is that people, as I do continue to show up to meetings or to go places, there are people who will personally and professionally help me, make sure that I know who the good and the bad players are, give me guidance on what to ask for, what not to ask for, who to talk to. There's always those people that will do that. And I totally lost where I was going with this. What were you talking about before I started this story? What did you say? I have no idea what just happened.
Speaking of blonde.
Yeah. What were you talking about?
We were talking about you being called into these meetings, into these corruption cases.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out what the Jessica bat signal would be.
That's what it was. So you were talking about the information that I'm asking for in the public records. So these people, it's interesting. They'll tell me who's good and who's bad, and of course they're just going on their best opinions and the experiences that they've had. But there's been several times when someone thinks that someone is on the up and up, and then I will ask for information and that person will be super closed off about it, or defensive, or just angry, and it catches everyone off guard. It's like one of the quickest identifiers of who somebody is in their public office, whether they're elected or just appointed or just a city employee or a county employee or whatever it may be. But it's just indicative, how resistant you are to transparency. I think people think a lot more people are open to it until they're faced with it. And then it surprises everybody that fewer people are open to it than aren't.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a bat signal of some Louis Vuitton heels, up against the clouds that Jessica knows I'm needed. And you go and hop in the Batmobile with your trusty Robin, Eric.
I mean, I just wish I had someone to drive me. I'm tired of driving.
I would figure you'd have a driver.
I'm working for it.
But anyway, yes, it's if you don't follow Jessica on Facebook, you really should. And again, I've said it 100 times. Her stories are good. The people who comment on her stories are outstanding.
They are.
She's got some really good one-liners, and it's really worth the read.
Yeah, someone told me the other day that my stories are dinner and the commenters are dessert. And everybody wants to skip dinner and just have dessert. But you can't have dessert without dinner. And I was like, that's perfect. I love that. But, yes. So.
Well, moving into the show, and I don't have a good transition to go to this.
There's
Providence,
never-
Rhode Island councilwoman totally bombs the concept of civil disobedience.
Totally bombs the concept of civil disobedience is my language, not the language of the article. I just want to be clear about that. But this woman's a moron.
These are our opinions, and not necessarily those of All on Georgia. Let's go ahead and get that one in early.
Yes,
go ahead, Jess.
it is our opinion. That one's my opinion. I don't know what Dave thinks, but we'll find out in a second. But I mean, that's a professional opinion. Let me tell you about this lady. So, I'm sure everyone heard about the statute just ahead of the Columbus Day, Indigenous Persons Day, whatever we're working with, whatever your belief system may be, that they sprayed red paint and dumped red paint all over his statue in Providence. And she said in an article over and over to multiple media outlets that she supports the vandalism because she wants people to stop celebrating genocide. And her quote was, "It's healthy civil disobedience is really good for society. I don't know who did it, but they created a really healthy dialogue in Providence." First of all, lady, civil disobedience is the refusal to comply with certain laws or to pay taxes and fines as a peaceful form of protest. Just because throwing paint on something is quiet doesn't mean that it's a peaceful form of protest. It's vandalism. It's criminal. That's not civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is what Martin Luther King and Gandhi and our former civil rights leaders used to do. Not the ones we see today, not the social justice warriors.
Yeah, and allow me to expound upon that point. How dare you compare vandalism to people sitting at a lunch counter or a woman refusing to give up her seat on the bus to a white person? How dare you compare marchers being hit with fire hoses and attacked with dogs and remaining peaceful to destroying public property? It shows a complete lack of understanding of history. And I know, and we've discussed before when we talked about several stories, whether it's blackface or anything else, that a lot of people don't have a understanding of history. But this councilwoman should. You're an educated person. You're a person in a place of responsibility. You should have some historical perspective as to what things mean. And when you use terms like civil disobedience, you invoke Martin Luther King, Gandhi. You invoke great people who put life and limb on the line to advance equality. And never did I hear a speech from Martin Luther King Jr. that said, "Go find statues of people that you don't like and dump red paint on them."
No, in fact, he told people to do the opposite, to avoid violence, which, I mean, no, you're not hurting people, but it's not a peaceful protest. And this is something that made national headlines, and her comment came well beyond or well after the story itself made national headlines. So she knew that she had an audience about this. And I really resent the fact that she spread so much misinformation about what civil disobedience is, because I do believe that civil disobedience is an imperative part of our society and our political universe, I guess you could say. And this is not it.
It was a game changer. It was a a deathless revolution. It changed a system of government in the South. And it did in India also. I mean, an entire country, it changed the system of government without firing a shot. We're saying
Rosa Parks.
Absolutely.
And this is not changing. This did not change anyone's opinion. Nobody's. I can say that with certainty. Throwing paint on a statue did not change anybody's opinion. The same people who woke up thinking Christopher Columbus is Christopher Columbus and the people who woke up calling it Indigenous Persons Day were the same when they woke up and when they went to bed the day this happened.
Yeah, no one walked by that statue and said, "Oh, damn. You know what? I was wrong." When people turned on their TVs in the 60s and they saw police officers using nightsticks and water cannons against other human beings, against other Americans, that changed opinions. That changed minds, that changed hearts. What this jackass did was vandalism. And, the problem with even calling it vandalism, it gets lumped in with some kid down in your neck of the woods put googly eyes on a statue in Savannah.
Mm-hmm.
And they called that vandalism. And I thought that was funny as hell. Because there was no real damage to the statue, and it was probably a college prank from SCAD or somebody like that. This is actually the city or the state is going to have to pay to remove that paint. They're going to pay somebody to sit there.
The taxpayers.
The taxpayers will have to pay to have somebody pressure wash and remove that paint. And of course, when you do that, it's bronze, so you're going to have to. You have to coat the bronze back so that everything looks uniform to get it back the way it was. This is just stupid, childish behavior from a jackass, but it's being condoned by a moron that the people elected.
Yep, I concur. So you do agree that she's a moron, so that is our opinion, not that of all in Georgia, but it's a consensus on this show. And she's the moron of the week.
But I've been told I'm an elitist and think a lot of people are morons.
Well, that is true.
Speaking of moronic, if a Massachusetts bill becomes law, using the word commonly referred to as a female dog could cost you $200, and if you have the audacity to use it again, land you in jail for, I think, 3 months.
I am hoping they pass it, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to use it, and I'm going to take it to the Supreme Court.
Well, it has to be used. Now, the person who is being called B can report it, or a person who hears you using it can report it.
Which is so ridiculous.
There's a lot of ways to use that term, and not all of them are, offensive. In fact, I know very few women who are actually offended by that word, because there's a Trump word in there that goes beyond that. Because most women will say, yeah, I am a B. You know what that means? That means a woman who knows what I want. I know what I want. You can call me what you want. The B word doesn't even have a sting anymore. And dudes call each other that now.
You know what's interesting about the component that somebody hears you say it? Because I'm hoping that it would require some sort of proof. Not just, well, I heard him say that, or I heard her say that. But Massachusetts is a two-party consent state. So you can't record anybody without their consent.
Nice callback.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the proposed law to make Georgia a two-party consent state. Look, it's context. Even if, you know what, I don't want to get caught into context, but my friends and I call each other horrible names, and we love each other. And it's not even mad at each other. We just call each other horrible names. And if someone overhears us, but it's not even context. If I want to stand up and call a politician a B, which has been known to happen, I've heard me do it. That's protected political speech. And
yes.
To say that you could throw me in jail, you hit me for a $200 fine. Guess what I'm going to call you? And bam, there's 3 months.
Well, accost, annoy, degrade, that's so subjective. Because what you find degrading with your friends may be, or what you don't find degrading, may be extremely degrading to myself or others.
Or if being degraded is your thing.
Right.
I mean,
everybody's different.
I mean, that could be your thing. It's like, I heard the apartments have really thin walls. And I heard what she was saying to him. I heard what he was saying to her. It sounded really degrading. Like, no, that's our thing. Even the being degraded thing, that's protected speech. That's why speech is protected. Is you can say really, really degrading things about people. And it's, if I have really degrading things to say about the Georgia Speaker of the House, and you tell me if he feels offended, he can throw me in jail. I mean, he'd have to go to court first. So, I mean, I'm never going to see his jail cell, but...
Well, I think what's most alarming to me is that, well, there's two things that are alarming. One, the bill, they said, the Washington Post reported that Daniel Hunt, who's a Democrat, dropped the bill because a woman asked that he file that kind of legislation. And it said, it's important whether you agree or disagree with the legislation being proposed that you honor the duty to represent your constituents and have their voices heard. No, we're a representative republic. You are supposed to have values and take those with you to the legislature. You don't just take everything. That's not how this works. We elect people based on their values, and those values are what they're supposed to adhere to. Second, this is the kind of crap that, like, why people say that women should not vote. Because it's emotional, baseless, unconstitutional garbage like this that makes everyone think that women are irrational and not capable of having policy discussions. If someone calls you, yes, I used the word without calling it the B word or whatever. If someone calls you that, that's probably the least worst thing that's going to happen to you all day. Move on.
And my response is always, I've been called worse by better.
Sure.
Man, I use that term, I don't know, 100 times a week. And never is very rarely pointed at anybody. That's not a joke. But to the thought police, the word police, the idea that the government has the right to restrict individual words, where does it stop? And this is not, it's not, this, the slippery slope thing is stupid. First of all, I believe in fighting words. There's some things that you say to somebody that's just fighting words. You're angry and you say whatever you think is going to evoke a reaction. That doesn't mean that's who you are. That means in that moment you picked something out of the vocabulary that's going to hurt them the worst. But all of that aside, that's personal judgment. If I go up to a guy and I bow up at him and he does it and I call him a little B, and that's invoking a reaction. It still doesn't mean that the government has any place in regulating what I can say and where. And I don't want to hear that fire at a crowded theater BS. Because that's exactly what it is. In fact, that quote comes from a court ruling limiting political speech. It wasn't actually from anybody who yelled fire in a crowded theater. It came from a political speech saying you can't incite riots with your words. And you know what? I'm tired of hearing about violent speech and everything else. If you want violence, try getting punched in the damn face. That's violence. If words hurt you, you know, why don't you go get popped a couple times and you figure out words don't hurt that damn bad. Not that yes. I know. Not that you were really fuzzy on where I stand on people who are little bees when it comes to words.
It's okay. This show has it's been derailed in a jiffy. I mean, I was talking about women not being able to vote, and you're over here hollering about inciting a riot. So we're just.
Well, that's what the people who back these words go back to is those are words of violence, and those are, I was watching interviews with people today talking about it incites violence to call somebody that. Shut up. You know what incites violence? Hitting someone in the head with a baseball bat. That incites violence. If you're so offended by my words that you can't go on with life, maybe you shouldn't. Do us all a favor. Again, these are our opinions, and not necessarily those of all in Georgia.
Just to be clear.
So, a recall from a show we did in October of last year. It is our annual Halloween story in Butts County. The sheriff had this great idea of putting signs in sex offenders' yards saying, not to trick or treat here, there's a sex offender. And now he's got himself a fat little lawsuit.
I mean, I feel like you could see this train coming down the tracks, don't you? Because it's
I feel like we saw it 12 months ago when we said, I don't think you could do that.
Yeah, I mean, these sex offenders probably need a little time to get their legal team together. The signs say, stop, warning, no trick or treat at this address, a community safety message from Butts County Sheriff Gary Long. Like, it's an eye-catching sign, wouldn't you say? Like,
oh, and he signed it.
Right. And this is a very hot topic. Like, I remember last year, people were cussing themselves out on my page when I talked about this because I don't support this. I would go as far as to say that everyone who has ever been a host on this show believes that if somebody is out of prison, whether they're on the sex offender registry or not, like, if it's safe enough to have them out of prison, it's safe enough not to put a sign in their yard no matter what day it is. And I just, there's a duty, at some point, there's a duty of the parents to make sure they know where their kids are trick-or-treating.
Well, look, the thing is, you don't have to turn your light on Halloween. I don't. I go to my younger brother's house and go take go with the twin 6-year-old nephews. There's now 6. And watch them go trick or treating and all that stuff because that's the closest we'll be to being parents. You just turn your light off, and if you have somebody who has a restriction of not being around children that are not directly related, whatever the restriction is, and that person puts their light on, how tough is it to drive a police vehicle by their house and go, their light's on, they're seeing trick or treaters, go pick them up? Opposed to the guy that got popped for having pictures of his 17-year-old girlfriend when he was 18, got hit with a sex offender charge, or was walking home and took a leak somewhere and got a indecent exposure and nailed with a sex offender charge, or any dozens of charges that are technically illegal, but he's going to spend time on the sex offender without having a sign outside your house. It is it's like he never read the Scarlet Letter.
Right.
I mean, it's not a new book. It's out there. I mean, I think it's required reading in either freshman or sophomore year in most colleges. Well, if not high schools. I don't think high school reads books anymore.
Well, yeah, but and in Statesboro we just burn them. But
another good callback.
Yeah, it's the flashback episode. I just, there's so many things wrong with this. Everything from what it actually is doing to the fact that the taxpayers have to defend this, because, you can't sue the sheriff personally. You're suing the sheriff's office, and I'm sure that sovereign immunity and all of that's going to get in the way of it. It's just going to make for a cluster when it's one night. I mean, I think when we talked about it last year, we talked about the sex offenders and they do that down here where they'll take them to a location, literally lock them in a room during the hours of trick-or-treating and then let them go home or take them back home or whatever the case may be.
Yeah,
I actually have less of a problem with that than this. I mean, I don't support either, but at least you're not like
publicly shamed.
Yes, and again, not every sex offender is a predator. There's a difference.
Right.
I don't want somebody who tinkled in public to have a sign in their yard when they're gainfully employed and maybe treasurer of the HOA or something. I mean, come on.
And the thing is, the program that you're talking about, with they go, say, get locked away. They go in a room, they watch movies, there's popcorn, there's refreshments. It's mostly for people who are still being watched and people who are on parole, but it's a program available to them. It's from what I recall, it's largely voluntary. That, you know what, you are not going to be on any watch list. If anything happens in your neighborhood, you can go back and say, my alibi is pretty solid. It's you. And you're right. And like we said, the term sex offender is so wide and so improperly handed out that you have this vision of someone being a sex offender being greasy hair, combed down, and driving a windowless van, that it does encompass people who were scooped up in things that one, don't involve kids, two, don't involve actual assault, that you're an offender. And again, we defend the worst damn people on this show because we stand by principle. And
yeah, government's making us do this.
Right. We're not defending, and again, I want to be clear, we don't defend the individual. We're defending the principle that you don't put a sign in somebody's yard. If they're that damn dangerous, don't let them out of prison.
Right. If they have to be locked up for one night a year, then they have no business being out. Because children, I understand they're not knocking on your door, but they're out every day of the year.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, with iPads and games and everything else, I don't know if they're actually outside every day of the year.
Okay, well.
That's just the old man.
They're in public. They are available. They could snatch up a kid or go. I mean, if somebody's going to reoffend, they're going to reoffend.
Oh, yeah. If that's your thing, there is nothing that we can do to stop you. And that even includes the stories on chemical castration and everything else. If that's your thing, what's broken is in your head, not in your britches. If that's your thing, that's where I believe we should still have state hospitals. If that's what's broken in your head, you should not be in a free society. Yeah, it goes back to the Matt Lowe thing of just, not that the government should do it, but somebody should kill him. But yeah, if that's what's broken in your head, that's it.
The Matt Lowe doctrine.
The Matt Lowe doctrine, yeah.
Just kill him.
Just kill him. But yeah, the sign of the yard, I don't know how this could... Okay, I don't know if I told you this last year. Little brother bought a house in a very nice neighborhood, but the first year they were there, no trick-or-treaters came to the door. And they were kind of wondering what happened. They bought all this candy, saw all these kids in the neighborhood. I think my sister-in-law at the time was pregnant with the twins, and no one came to the door. It wasn't until later when he was going to the HOA meeting that they're like, "Oh, you're the new owner of that house?" And it turned out that the guy that owned the house before them was one of these people. Like everyone in the neighborhood knew not to go knock on that door. So he got the molester house. So it took him like 18 months to make sure that everybody in the neighborhood knew that someone else had the house.
They need their own sign that says not a sex offender.
Screw it. We're fat. We'll keep the candy.
Yeah.
I say we're fat. Chris is smaller than I am.
Not predators, but selfish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, we've got some Supreme Court decisions here.
Georgia Supreme Court.
Georgia Supreme Court. I mean,
they work busy more. Week.
It was. So, the Georgia Supreme Court overturns a murder conviction. A man is set free after the Supreme Court of Georgia overturned his murder conviction and life prison sentence of Tyron Henry, was serving time for shooting Michael Johnson to death in Savannah back in 2015. Henry claimed he was protecting himself because he and his friends were being threatened by Johnson. 2016. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I think the point of contention, one of the points of contention was that Henry was drinking and maybe had drugs in his system. And so they were saying that he was more aggressive. So that's why they charged him with malice murder, felony murder, like this slew of possession of a firearm during a commission of felony, like a slew of charges. So carry on.
Right. Well, he was found not guilty of malice murder and guilty of felony murder and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Sentenced to life plus 5 years in prison, and again, then appealed the decision. The Supreme Court ruled that the court refused to properly instruct the jurors so they could determine whether Henry acted in self-defense.
So, this is probably one of those cases where, I mean, I don't know anything about the actual facts of the case, so I don't want to speak to like whether or not he's innocent or guilty. But it's really irrelevant because what's been overturned here is something that we've talked about on the show a lot as kind of, I guess, like a fringe discussion, because the basis of not instructing the jury is that they didn't have all the information they needed to make the decisions when they went back in the courtroom. Because if anyone's ever sat in on a trial, like once they offer closing statements, the judge goes through this lengthy list of charges that the defense and the prosecutors have offered, and not charges like criminal charges, but charges for them to consider. You know, was there a self-defense component? Was the malice component there? It's all these just definitions for the jury to consider so that they can determine whether or not that A, that was proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and B, that, you know, that element was there. It also includes like impeaching witnesses, all these different factors. So in a trial like this, there would be a lengthy list of things that they would take back to them. And then when they go back there, those are the only things that they're supposed to consider. Well, if they're not told to consider self-defense, but that was like the entire element of the defense, I think that's worthy of being overturned. I mean, if you just want to say that after the trial and say, well, I was acting in self-defense, no, that doesn't count. But if from day one you're saying, no, I was defending myself, I was defending my friends, you know, we felt threatened, whether that's true or not, it needed to be considered, and then the jury needed to determine it. And I think the reason that I think it's important to the show is, again, flashing back, with the case of the Kingsland police officer, Zachariah Presley. You know, we talked about the jury not being told that if there's no element of an underlying crime, you can't be convicted of a violation of oath of office. And the land rights case from Hinesville that I think we talked about on last week's show. You know, the jury was not instructed, and it's not always the judge, sometimes it's the attorneys, but the jury was not instructed on all of the components that they needed to consider. And jurors are dumb, not because they're trying to be dumb, they're just dumb because they don't know any better. They don't do this all the time.
I think a better term, dumb, which I agree with, is layman.
Well, it's both.
Yeah, juries are intentionally laymen. We don't want juries of a bunch of lawyers. It's supposed to be juries of our peers. But they're laymen. So when the judge and the prosecutor start throwing around a lot of Latin, a lot of terms that they don't, like we talked about manslaughter, murder versus manslaughter, there are defined differences. I would love to see the law change where you can't charge multiple things for the same offense. Now, complicating factors such as violation of oath, fine, but you don't get to charge murder 1, murder 2, manslaughter 1, manslaughter 2, and say, okay, well, here's your menu. The prosecutor should have to pick it, and whoever he takes to the dance, he takes home with him, and you prove that case. You don't get to hand them an a la carte menu and go, just pick one of these to put some in prison.
Well, and we've talked about that a lot You said you're probably going to jail in Massachusetts, but if this is listened to in Massachusetts, I'll totally file a complaint. Anyway, we've talked about that a lot, about how people are, like, the district attorneys and prosecutors these days are overcharging just to get something, and then you end up with some bogus charge and the public's outraged, and it's because of things like this. Like, the system, and don't get me wrong, like, there are legitimate cases that are sabotaged by a number of things, and the media, and it happens. But I don't understand why the moral obligation and the ethical obligation of the attorneys and the judge has not come into play more. Like, at what point is that going to be? Is someone going to charge that in the courts and work that up through the appeals in the Supreme Court, that there is some sort of obligation to go beyond, like, so in this case, I don't think it was the judge's position to make sure that, well, maybe it was. I mean, if the defense has presented self-defense all along, I guess you would say, and the defense doesn't make that a jury charge to send back to the jury, then that would be inadequate defense when you have your appeal. That would be an element of that. But when, like, with the violation of oath, that's the law. The judge should have an obligation to say, this is how the law works. You can't, do you see what I'm getting at? Like, at some point, the judge, when it does entail components of the law, that should be considered. It should be on the judge to make sure that that's part of it, even if the attorneys fall short, because it's illegal.
Well, here's the thing, is this ruling could be bad on both ends. One,
that's right.
Well, first of all, it's a procedural dismissal. So the judge didn't do what he was supposed to do. It's procedural. So if we go off the assumption that he is guilty, that he is a murderer, he gets to go free because the judge didn't do his damn job.
Right.
If we go the other way, that he was innocent, and just because you have alcohol or drugs in your system does not mean that you forfeit your right of self-defense. That is well established in the law. In fact, the law is written that shooting a firearm under the influence of alcohol is illegal unless acting in self-defense. So you can't get drunk on your back porch and start shooting under the law. But if you're walking home from a restaurant and you had a few martinis and someone pulls a gun, you can absolutely defend yourself. So on the other end, by not introducing that, you could put an innocent man in prison. Both things are wrong. So either way, this judge shouldn't be sitting on the bench. He's not qualified to do that. Obviously, he would either set an innocent man free by not giving proper instructions, or set a guilty man free by not giving proper instruction, or put an innocent man in prison. And of course, both charts cross over with the possibility that he's a guilty man in prison, or that he would stay in prison. But he opened the door to this conviction being overturned by not doing his damn job. He has one job, and that is to be the head attorney in that room, and that's to be the representative of justice, not the state and not the defendant, but justice. And he failed. I'm not saying he should ever be an attorney again, but he sure as hell should not sit on the bench.
Right. It's a problem, though. I mean, so this whole thing was based on another case that came down a couple weeks ago in early October, McClure v. State, and it was about self-defense specifically. So this case that we're talking about with the murder is contingent on that one, but this ruling with Tyrone Henry, or whatever his name is, it could impact a lot of cases going forward, because not having the proper instructions is more common than I think most people would even be willing to admit.
Well, and I feel sorry for this young person, because he has spent the last couple of years in jail, and truthfully, it's not like he got got exonerated by the Amnesty Project. He wasn't in for 30 years, but his job prospects are gone. Anything that he had going for him is gone. Anybody who knows him around Savannah is going to have that halo of doubt around him. And what that's going to end up doing is incentivizing him to go into crime. They already think you're a murderer. Go into it. It is so problematic that this guy has spent a couple years in prison, in real big boy prison, and then let him out and go, I'm sorry, no harm, no foul. It's so egregious to me to deprive somebody of their freedom and throw them in a cage like an animal because the judge didn't give proper instruction is unbelievably egregious to me.
I agree.
I know, soapbox. I know. It's.
There's been a lot of soapboxing in this episode. There's been a lot of yelling. I've been flailing my arms like half the episode, and I'm in here. The dogs aren't even in here to see me flail my arms this week, so we should call it the soapbox episode.
Soapbox episode.
Well, now that we've run 15 minutes over our cutoff time.
Well, yeah. What closing thoughts?
I don't have one. I'm just going to quietly step down off the soapbox for the week.
Tulsi Gabbard and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, both Army veterans. Tulsi was accused by Hillary of being a Russian asset, an American-born woman who has achieved the rank of major in the Hawaiian National Guard. That's one hell of a program Russia's got. They must be recruiting him and putting him on a long career path. And I believe it was Cory Booker that questioned the integrity and courage of Pete Buttigieg, who is a openly gay combat Army veteran. You probably want to choose your words a little more carefully before throwing that. And look, I don't agree with either one of their politics, but to question their courage or their national loyalty takes some testicular fortitude that is it's a little out there. So for Jessica Szilagyi, I'm Dave Roberts. Thanks for hanging in with us.